Hello there, and welcome back to our Orlando Timelapse series. In today's episode, we will primarily build on this brickwork building again and start with the tricky part of creating this tower on the left side. So for today, I do not really have any topic or planned logic in what I'm saying. We just see where it will lead us in the end here. In the last episode, I primarily talked about many different topics, but not so much about the actual buildings that we have created here. Maybe we should focus today on that. When you take a look on the exterior of those buildings, you would get the sense of that they are separated houses by itself. So whatever function they present to you from the outside, so for example on this building it says books, toys and music, you would assume that it's about that when you enter this building. And it's true, of course, at least partly, but not in the way like you think it would be. What I mean by that, and I really have to say I found out very recently, this whole side of the main street, or pretty much up to the middle of this street, the interior of those buildings is one coherent space that is connected. It's one giant gift shop. Before I watched footage of people actually going through this array of buildings that there are, I thought every building has their own specific purpose and is one enclosed space by itself. It kinda shows you that even I fell for this illusion. From the outside you really get this idea that you have their specific buildings that serve their own unique purpose throughout this whole main street, but actually that's not the case. It's one giant gift shop, at least on this side. When I think a little bit more about why that's the case, maybe, I feel like you have to think about how many people are crossing this street on a daily basis. I mean, you have here thousands of people that going through this narrow street that is only 8 to 10 meters wide. And imagine if every building would be one separate building by itself. So for example, the Emporium building, you have here 13 to 13 meters. That's roughly 160 square meters. That's your average 2 or 3 room apartment. And the Emporium building is by far the biggest building on the main street. But still, that's just not very big. And on top of that, you have now to provide also shelves and clothing hangers and cashier desks in this already limited space. And so it makes perfect sense then to open up those interior walls, that you have here a free flow through the gift shop. It not only helps now to manage the layouting within those buildings, that you don't trap their people within this limited space, but it also helps tremendously with the crowd congestion on the main street itself. You have here like another side alley where you can walk upon. You don't have to necessarily walk on the exterior side of the street to walk through this area. You can walk within the interior space when it's maybe raining. That's a great option here. When you take a look on an aerial image, this thing becomes more apparent to you, I think. You can see here clearly that in the backlot, there is literally no difference in those buildings. Mostly it's one giant grayish blob of a building. And so therefore, if you take a look on the aerial image, I think you see the true function of those buildings much clearer. And they tell a more truthful impression about what a building is actually about. When you have this mindset in the back of your head, then you could of course say that every facade you see on Main Street, all of it is just fake. I myself strongly disagree that everything is just fake, but I know that within the architectural discussion, for example, or civil planning, this term that something is fake and that looks Disney-esque is sadly well known and common. I mean, when I hear something like that, it makes me very angry in a way. Although you could say it's objectively true that what you are seeing in the foreground is not actually what you have in the background, but does that really matter here if the illusion is so perfect? After all, you have still a building here. And even if that is only a facade of it, it's there in 3D space. All emotions and feelings, when we look on it, they are still real. So if this building is real or not, I couldn't bother less. And I'm sure that 99% of the people in this park wouldn't even thinking about that. I mean, you are here to enjoy your wonderful time at the Magic Kingdom, where hopefully you did not pay 100 or 200 bucks only to be bothered about every building that is just not real. I mean, this architecture discussion, if now something is real or not, I just hate that. It doesn't bring any value to it. It's just saying, oh, and this is good and this is bad. I will say that in a particular context, I like this idea much more. I mean, here in Germany, sometimes there are open public discussions about an old town square reconstruction that got destroyed during World War II. And therefore, there's a special dedication about the originality and its execution, how to reconstruct that. I can understand that in this case, you want a true representation of all those old building techniques and that something has the same material like 100 years ago. I can understand that. So for me, very locally, a very famous example of that is the Frankfurter Altstadt. It's like an old town area around the city hall, and most of this area got heavily destroyed in World War II. There were some buildings that luckily survived this bombing, but the overall majority got destroyed. And during all this time there was really not that much happening. It was very broken down and not that pleasant to walk through. But in the last 10 years the public interest came up to restore this area. I mean, when you take a look on the history of this city of Frankfurt, it's a very historical site, and all those buildings, there were some that go even back to the medieval times and to the Renaissance era. So easily 600 or 800 years old. And so as I said, the interest came up to reconstruct that. What they did now was that they not only reconstructed those buildings where they had reference images from, but inventing certain buildings completely on their own. Always with the mindset, of course, that they would fit in their execution to all those historical ones. And so at least in my opinion, the result of it looks very amazing. We have on one side historical buildings, but on the other side historical buildings that look alike. But both of those things are made with the equal amount of execution and in the same quality. And that's what makes it so stand out, I think. When you take now a stroll around this area, you get this really amazing atmosphere that you are within an old town and all those buildings have their own unique qualities. So you could say that's also the same thing that's happening right here at the Magic Kingdom, where it also makes the impression that every building that you see has their own unique quality. But still, there are many people out there where I'm sure that they have the opinion, oh, the one thing is made historical accurate and real to its thing, and the other thing only pretends to look like it for another purpose. And I just can't agree to that. It's all about the context. If you now have a town square in an old town, it's of course one thing to stay there pretty historical accurate just because this area was far ago and that old, and therefore it should be in the same style again. But here at the Magic Kingdom, we don't have anything that was before us here. Everything you see is created completely from the Imagineers that designed this park. I think it's absolutely valid to tell all those stories within the park. And therefore it doesn't make any difference if this thing is now built intrinsically complete, or if it only makes the impression from the outside to look alike. And so in the end, I feel like it's always a question about the right context. You cannot categorize or generalize all things in the world into one bucket here. You always have to look on the individual context and situation, how those things are created in an area or location on the world. If it's an old town in an old city, it makes much more sense in that regard to stay historically accurate than compared to an fantasy land that is completely built out of pure imagination. It has the advantage of not having any cultural heritage attached to it, and therefore it can be whatever it wants to be. It can of course take certain references from the real world, but the execution and design of that is completely unique. At least in my opinion, it doesn't have to be categorized into any timeline of any era of this world. It's in a way timeless. That's what makes it so relatable. When you go to Disneyland or the Magic Kingdom, you enter a world that does not only represent the present right now, but also of the past and the future. And therefore you are in all those three states at the same time, and you don't have to follow any narrative from the real world in that way. Since it's absolutely irrelevant, I would even say, if it's historically accurate or if something has a specific architecture. There's only one thing, and one alone. Come on, I know you know it, what I wanted to say. It's about the story. It's not like in this Frankfurt example that I told you earlier, where it was purely about the public interest in restoring those buildings back to its originality, how they were built all those years ago. That's absolutely not the case here. Here it's about the story at the forefront, and everything that we need to tell this story is relevant for us. The main street in particular, I think, serves as this conversion point from reality to fantasy. It's the area that lives up to the dreams and ideals of all Americans, and I would say today to all humans on this planet, and it makes the big introduction to this whole story-driven land that follows beyond that. So well, where are we? We completely drifted bigly here. I actually wanted to talk about this building today, but apparently that's just not going to happen. No, but serious, I will do it now. But just the thing, I can't know everything. There are probably dozens of articles and books about this whole park that you could probably read now. At some point I might look into that a little bit more deeply, but right now I just want to get those episodes out, and it would take me far too long now to prepare for each episode to look at all the details and maybe the construction dates or something like that. I just keep on going with my usually style how I explain things, because it's just working, and I think never change a running system. And as I said, at some time I go a little bit more deeply. I know this interest came a little bit up in the comments. What I will do from now on is to show from time to time reference images of the buildings we are building on, so that you get a live side-by-side comparison between what we are creating in the game and how it's looking in reality. In that manner, I believe you get a much clearer view on the challenges and approach how we recreate something. After all, that's exactly the view I have when creating something, and so why shouldn't you have? So maybe to finally talk now about this building, how I created it, let's talk about this tower on the left side. I mean, you saw me at the very beginning of this episode creating that, where I used this little trick where you create only one side of it, and then you make a copy of that, rotate it around 45 degrees, and you pull all elements to the edge of those two copies. In that way you get a very sharp corner on that side, and you just do it then for 4 sides and then finally for 8 sides. And that's what we needed for that octagonal shape. So whenever you are creating a tower or something that has multiple sides of the same facade on it, then that's my preferred method. The difficult part I find, and I will show here a reference image of course, how to properly guess the right proportion of that. One thing that is fixed is the trim area that you see from the right side coming, and that is the same height like on the Emporium building and also on the blue building. And so therefore I already had there some fix and reference points to go from. So one thing you see me right now doing here is to lay down this new pavement. On the main street floor that you see in front of the park, I already made sure that you have there 2 by 2 meter sized pavement slabs. And the thing about them, they are of course precasted, and everyone looks a little bit different in reality. So they all have different colors and slightly different textures attached to them. And so when it comes to this sort of customly designed pathing, the options within this game are a little bit coarse. You have here those amazing panel elements. They serve great for those slabs, but the texture on them feels just a little bit too shiny, I feel like. But in general, I feel like that the pathing or the flooring gets a little bit neglected oftentimes. I mean, now with the path tool, this might not be the case anymore. But when you want to create a very, and I mean a very realistic park, then you also have to care about the floor. When you take later a photo from this scene here, 40% of the picture will be the floor by itself, and therefore we should also care about how the floor is looking and that it has an equal amount of realism within it. In a couple of episodes you can see me go back to the pathing and adding also those slabs that you see right here to the asphalt area of this street. They are a lot bigger than those ones on the sidewalk, so they are 6 by 6 meters, but you also have the same logic there happening. You always have those squarish slabs of asphalt that is precasted. So in the very future we will talk about pathing again soon. But having said that, we come now to the roof of this tower, and I thought to myself, well, since we have now the luxury of using those pistons with the rotational symmetry mode, we have to use that now. Such a tool in Planet Coaster 1, my god, it would be such a blessing to have that. It's not so much about the actual functionality. I mean, you could make that also work in Planet Coaster 1. You just do one side of that and rotate it then about 45 degrees, as I did earlier with the tower. But the bonus that you have now, you can see already how it looks later on when you have it 8 times copied around. And therefore, especially if you look now for a certain curvature, this is the perfect tool. When I'm 100% honest to you, I'm still a little bit worried about this feature of this piston. I mean, I saw on Reddit, for example, that someone mentioned that when you build something within this piston, it will decrease the performance of this game a bit more than if you would build the same thing just out of solely scenery pieces. I don't know if that's actually true. If it's true, I mean, it's maybe in the 0.1% range, I would say. At least right now you can see what I'm doing right now with the roof. I thought, why not, right? I still don't see any other piece except art pieces to create roof shingles. And I thought now with this 5% thing with the art pieces, we can do something like that. And so I wanted to show it here. Maybe on all roofs that have curved surfaces, we could do something like this, since I believe the roof shingles, they pop a little bit more in your eye when you see this curvature than, for example, a flat roof. So the only major drawback of those roof shingles right now are the LOD settings, so the level of detail. When you zoom out of this park at a certain distance, those shingles will disappear. So maybe I should explain it a little bit more in detail so that you really know what I'm talking about. So when you look on something like an art piece here, it has a specific geometric mesh that it's built upon. And the far you get away from this element in 3D space, this LOD setting should help in improving the performance, and therefore it reduces down the geometry of this mesh to a bare minimum. Oftentimes there are multiple levels of details, so maybe on this art piece 2 or 3 I could imagine, and the far I get away, the less polygonal faces it has, and therefore it helps me improving my performance within this game. The far I get away of this park, I get much more FPS in the end. But the big issue right now, where I believe nobody thought about it just because nobody experienced this, when you have an art piece there that is scaled down to 5%, the LOD settings scale with them, and that means the distance shrinks. So if you have an art piece that has 100% scalability, you will see that even if you are 500 meters away. But if you have the same art piece with 5% scaling, it will disappear within like 50 meters. And so therefore all those awnings and those roof shingles, they disappear if I get far away than 50 meters. So at least for this roof, I built like a basic model out of bigger art shapes to compensate for that. At a certain distance, you will just see this basic shape. So it's my own customly designed LOD there. But for those awnings, I just can't make anything there, since it will interfere with the mesh. You will see that when you come close. But that's really something I want to make clear here, and I want to bring attention to this because it's not only affecting now those art pieces. I saw it already in this game on quite a lot of pieces that the LOD settings are way off, and especially on foliage, it's devastating. Oh, and by the way, just look on those awnings right now. I mean, what is that? When you zoom out like from 50 to 100 and then to 200 meters, those LOD levels are just too different, and you really see them popping into the screen then. It's really annoying, and it had already an effect on which foliage I used in the park so far. On those trees that had a really poor LOD, I just didn't use them, although they would fit better in some cases. And so please, I beg you, Frontier, if you are listening, please make there some fix for those LOD settings. It not only affects now my park, in everyone else's park, it will exactly behave the same way, and it just looks very wrong when that happens. And I don't believe that Frontier doesn't want to implement that. I just feel like since those art pieces were not scalable before to 5%, they just forgot about that, to also update the LOD alongside that. At this point you could even start a discussion if LODs even make sense on art pieces. They should be the most performance-friendly pieces in the game by a lot. So on a square art piece, for example, you have only 6 polygons. When you compare that to any other asset in the game, so for example a lantern type or something, you will have there easily 100 polygons on it. And so therefore you could make the argument now that LODs only make sense on models that come with a fairly high amount of polygons by themselves. It doesn't really make sense to optimize an art piece with only 6 polygons. I mean, you could replace it at a certain distance with just a simple plane that only has 1 polygon, but that's not a niche where you really save on polygons. If you have there one super complex tree or lantern type that has easily over 1000 polygons, and if you place 10 of them, that's where your poly count increases. In today's day and age, and with the technology of PCs that we have, it really shouldn't be any problem here, but it's just the thing I'm trying to get around here. The more detailed your model is, the more it makes sense to use a LOD for that. If I only have here a rectangular shape, make it a plane at a certain distance, but make that threshold until it gets a plane so high that you don't see it pop into the screen, just like that. But maybe let's get back to our build now. As you see, I'm creating the upper roof part, if you can call it like that, of this blue building. And the one thing I noticed here, that this upper part that you see here it gets pushed back to the rear line of sight of those roofs. And it makes it so much more interesting to look at, I think. If you imagine like this area being in the front of the facade, it would be too prominent there. And if you just take like a little part of your facade there and push it into the background, you get a little bit more, let's say, tension or excitement into it, since not everything is on a 2D surface. There's a specific depth that is involved here. When you look from a guest perspective up to this building, depending on your position and where you look from, all the time your perspective on this building will be different, just because you pushed this thing into the back. When you take a look on the left side to this brickwork building, you have it there also a little bit happening, but in the other direction. This brickwork comes towards you with those little arches and so on. If you would have there just like a plain brickwork wall, it would be so boring to watch. It's only interesting to watch and it looks great because you have those ornaments and those changes in the depth happening. Maybe if you have watched the last episode, you can see it very well on this thumbnail. I made an image there and set the time of the day shortly before afternoon. And the shadows will intensify since the sun will be a little bit lower then, and also the shadow quality in the settings I put it there to very high, and this will just bump up the realism, I think. All the time you have there a shift in the depth happening, since you have shadows there, you will see that. So in a way you could kinda say that the element of having a shadow here is part of the building itself. Depending on what geometry your building has, it will perform a different shadow than any other building. And as I said, you can make use out of that. If you set there certain building elements in the facade of it that emphasize a certain shadow. It's also the same thing on the emporium building on the right side. Since you have the colonnade in front happening, when there's a shadow coming, you see them on the facade of it, behind it. And therefore you get a really detailed structure as a shadow happening a second time. What's so far so much about shadows here? When creating this upper part here, I only used pieces that would allow me to make it very thinly, since you can see the rear side of it here at the very top of this building. And so therefore I just made the rear side a flat surface. Theoretically, as a guest, you will not see that so much, but when you see it from a very strange angle from the side, you could see that this thing is actually much thicker than it actually would be. And therefore I made this thing now very thinly, like half a meter. But it's not only that. I want to make sure right now, as I'm creating all those buildings on the main street, that I already at least a little bit think about the backlot. Later on, when we go through the backlot then, I'm only focused on the detailing part of it. I don't want to go in there and start reconstructing all those rear sides of those buildings. I want to have them already set there for me. And so very fittingly, just in this very second, I create now the roof of the emporium building to the end of this episode. It will be of course not finished after that. This will be purely stuff for the next episode, but this roof here is of course very important. We said already that this building is probably the most important building throughout the whole main street, but the roof of it, I mean, that's really where all eyes will go later on. So one thing that I started within the last episode when starting on this blue building was that I refined the trim areas also of the emporium building. They had to fit in relationship to the blue building. And therefore you will see me now go around the emporium building to replace this new trim around it. At a certain point in time I really thought, is it really worth it to go now in this extra step and to refine this trim once again? Most probably on another building that is not so important like this one, I wouldn't do that. It's just purely because it's the emporium building, and I even made like the little rounding you have when you have like this roof happening, and the corner of it, it's like a little bit beveled. So you don't have like a super sharp corner happening, but instead a very nice curving of that. I'm not sure if you can see it right now in the time lapse, but later on in a couple of episodes, when this area is fully finished, I think it gives something special. So as I'm creating this roof here, it's again the thing about the degree that we have here of this tilted roof. Right now I believe I used 15 degree, but in the next episode I will spoil you now a little bit. I reset this whole roof, I mean completely insane I know, to 11.75. And it was mainly the consequence out of creating the big central roof in the very middle of this emporium building. Only after creating that first then I had the right degree there for the rest of the roof. So in that regard, everything you see right now, it gets a little bit modified in the next episode, but still that's roughly how the roof will look later on. So at this stage I think I will talk a little bit more about what I'm currently working on in the game. As I said in the last episode, I'm quite ahead of you guys. Right now building on the corner building on the right of the main street. But before I started on that, I made quite a bunch of little additions and little fixes to already built stuff. So for example, I completely redid the lighting in this park. Now with the lighting feature of the 5th update, it's really gorgeous looking and it's actually very pleasant to switch to nighttime here. Then I would like to give here a shout out to our park optimizer, Dan Austin. I believe he was watching even back when I streamed in 2019. Therefore he is really engaged within this project. And at some time the idea came up that it might be beneficial for the long term of our project that it gets optimized on the way on it. I myself are engaged in continuing this park, and so therefore I can't always revisit what I built so far, and there are certainly some things in the park right now where I would say they are really not optimized. And so when we're talking about optimization, it's not really about the visuals of it, it's more about the performance of it. There are certain things in the park like those windows on the city hall, and they are just not optimized. There are way better pieces right now with all those updates that were coming, where you can build this thing with like half of those pieces and it will still look pretty fine. In that regard, it has a direct impact on your own experience later on when you are maybe playing this park. And therefore I'm just very grateful and thankful to you, Dan Austin, that you actively, by choice, making this effort in making this park much more optimized. Thank you. So another thing that I did before starting on the other side was to redo, as I said previous, the pathing on the main hub. I'm still not 100% satisfied with how it looks right now, but at least it will look so much more better than with the asphalt that you see right now in the park. But I'm playing with the thought of keeping that optional. If you don't like that, you can just simply remove it and then you just have the standard asphalt there. And the other thing was also that I made the curvature of the main hub a little bit more bulky so that it fits to the aerial image that we have. I probably forgot now many things and I also don't want to spoil you too much, but that's roughly the timeline of those next episodes. You will see the continuation of this left side, and then after it we come back a little bit to the main hub and then we move towards the right side of the main street. So that pretty much lines out what you will see within the next episodes on this channel. And so maybe to end this little episode here, I would like to talk about Jurassic World Evolution 3. And it kinda surprised me that they went also now for a second sequel of the series. I thought after the second one it's finished and they focus more on those planet games, but apparently I'm wrong here. But when I watched a little bit about it, it kinda surprised me that they have now an actual building system within that. I thought in beforehand that they do it like in those prequels where you just have like a pre-made buildings there that you can plop down and it's mostly just this casual dinosaur management experience that you are getting there. but it seems like it's a little bit more on a finer course here. And at least when you take the game's visual and perspective, this makes absolutely sense. You have here a very realistic game that looks way more realistic than Planet Coaster, for example, that deserves, of course, also a detailed building system where you can play around with this realism vibe. I still would have hoped that they more go into this direction where they might use now their dinosaur development abilities to create maybe a DLC for Planet Coaster 2, where you might have your own dinosaurs in the park. I mean, how cool would that be to have here now some raptors strolling around on the main street, right? No, but listen, it's absolutely great for their company that with Universal in their back, I assume they will promote this game very greatly and it will be a financial success in the end. And that's absolutely great from the perspective of a Planet Coaster 2 player. I mean, just the pure fact that a tiny bit of those earnings go into the development of Planet Coaster 2, I mean, that's all I'm asking for. That they please don't abandon this game and provide content for multiple years to come, at least. And therefore they can make so many dinosaur games all day long. As long as they keep this game running, I'm absolutely okay with that. So as I'm saying this, it gets me even a little bit more excited about the next update and the next Unlocked stream in particular, since they have to provide there something for the 7th update. And in general, how this game is going to be continued. We know until this point nothing about it. At least right now all my bets are on those DLC packs from the prequel, so the Studio Pack, the Spooky Pack and the Adventure Pack. But even beyond those DLC packs, there are particular pieces in the prequel that I still miss. So for example, we had there some gemstone pieces that were so flexible and useful for creating any class piece there that is a little bit more tinier and has more mass attached to it. I mean, right now with those class sheet pieces, they are only sheets, and if you want to create now a lantern that has a bulb in it or like a glass dome around it, that's just not going to be recreated right now without that. And so my hope, of course, is that we will have here a very bright future for this game and that Frontier once again will surprise us. With that being said, I would like to conclude today's episode. We managed to make a great progress today. Most probably you saw that I added another intro to this video. I wanted from now on that each episode shows very shortly what it's about and that you have their cinematic shots that showcase it. Furthermore, you also saw that I included many reference images, and I think it's essential that you also see them since they are part of this recreation. It's the perspective that I have all the time when creating something, and therefore it only makes sense that you also see what we are recreating here. I tried to use 1/3 of the screen here, that you always see those images on the very right side of it, since always you have those side panels there when building anyway, so that you can continue watching the time-lapse. But both of those things, they are now relatively new here, and I would like to know your opinion about it. I'm still not 100% sure on all those things, but I feel like they make the act of watching a lot more interesting, since you just see much more there than just the time-lapse by itself. But with that being said, I think I will conclude it here today, and I hope you enjoyed it today. I thought it was a very nice episode so far, and all the things we talked about. And so as always, if you enjoyed today's episode, subscribe, like or comment, join as a member on this channel, join our Discord server, watch my other videos about Anaheim or Orlando, and thank you for watching. See you in the next one. Bye.